I lived in the Netherlands for 14 months. I say lived in past tense. Technically, on paper, I do still live in the Netherlands, but I've spent the past 3 months here in the US, and in a little under 2 days, my girlfriend and I will be getting on a plane to go to a country that neither of us have ever visited on a completely different continent from the Netherlands. That said, I don't know when we'll be back in the Netherlands, and technically, you could argue that I don't really live there anymore. And it's kind of strange, it kind of snuck up on us, but just based on our current circumstances, what we're doing right now is simply best for us in the long run. That said, I would still love to find my way back to the Netherlands at some point in time, preferably sooner rather than later. Well, David Wen here spent 7 years in the Netherlands. Now for me, maybe it's because I'm young, I'm 25 years old. I mean, for me, after 7 years in a place, I feel like that is home. Really, after 14 months, I felt like the Netherlands was home, and for good reason. It's because the Netherlands is literally, objectively, one of the best countries you can live in on the planet. So I can only imagine that after 7 years, it must have been very, very difficult for David Wen here to make that decision to leave the Netherlands. Now, fun fact, David, if you're watching this, I actually watched some of your videos along with some videos from other creators before I moved to the Netherlands myself. So David here was definitely an integral part in me mentally adjusting to making that international move. But now I want to see what's next for David in his journey after he leaves the Netherlands. And I want to know why he's leaving the Netherlands, because again, it's objectively one of the best places you can be. So I have to imagine that there must be some kind of deeper motive, some sort of subjective reason that's bigger than quality of life or well-being from an objective standpoint. That said, let's go ahead and get into this reaction.
7 years in the Netherlands. Peace, adventure, happiness. I built a life. I found myself. I felt at home. But then everything changed. And now I'm back in California.
Something interesting I've noticed is that a lot of people who make that move from the US to the Netherlands are either from California or spent extensive time in California. So just off the top of my head, David Wen, obviously, he's from California, exploring the foreign, shout out to Sam. He's from California. It's Sky, shout out to Sky if you're watching this. He lived in California for, I think, 8 or 9 years, something like that. And I obviously have been to LA pretty much every single year since 2020. So, I mean, for whatever reason, there seems to be this kind of connection between California and the Netherlands. And I don't know why, because California is literally about as far as you can get from the Netherlands in the US, at least, other than Hawaii, of course. Maybe it's because California is probably the most liberal state, it's the most progressive state in the US, and the Netherlands is obviously one of the most progressive countries, so they kind of go hand in hand in that regard. But in terms of the actual day-to-day experience of being in both of these places, it's literally about as different as it can possibly get. But let me hear him out.
And in this video, I'd like to share with you why I left, what's next for me, and the future of this channel. But first, let me tell you a quick story of how I ended up in the Netherlands. Let's go back 7 years.
So I didn't leave America to escape America. I left because I was curious about the world, and I was curious about Europe.
I completely relate to the curiosity component of wanting to leave the US. Sometimes it's not about just escaping the US, because you have to understand, most Americans don't really understand how bad the US is compared to the perception of it until they see these other places. So really, for most Americans, it's going to start off with curiosity, with interest. You have to be curious and interested enough in other places to make that financial investment to go overseas. And of course, most Americans never really gain the means to do so. And that's the big problem. That's why I make the videos I make, and I assume that's why David makes the videos he makes, and Exploring the Foreign, It's Sky, etc. That's why we make these kinds of videos, is so that we can sort of allow Americans to live vicariously through us, so that they can get that same experience and exposure that we got, where we see something else and realize, wow, not only is this better than I expected, but it's better than what I'm accustomed to. That said, he still left the Netherlands, so let's see why.
And I graduated from university, started working, and kind of forgot about this dream until my late 20s. Maybe it's because I saw the big 3-0 coming. I also felt stuck in my life and career. A lot of my friends were starting to settle down. I also felt the pressure to settle down as well, but I thought, not yet. And then I remembered this dream.
One day, I want to work and live abroad in Europe.
And I kind of felt like it was now or never. So I started applying for jobs in Europe. And I almost ended up in Helsinki, but that didn't work out. And then this dream job came to me in London. I applied, got to the final round, but I didn't get it. At that point, I almost decided to give up. But then I learned that I could study abroad in Europe and get a master's, and that would be my gateway into Europe. And so the Netherlands came up. They have a bunch of programs in English. The Dutch speak amazing English. They're known for being welcoming, and finding a job would be easier afterwards because there's so many international companies. And plus, it's a lot cheaper than American education. So
That right there is a really, really good point. Honestly, there are so many ways for Americans to move to Europe. I do feel like the Netherlands is one of the most accessible countries for Americans. Obviously, he went the schooling route, at least that's what it seems like. I know some other people took the working route, so they went and got jobs in Europe. Me personally, I took the entrepreneurial route. So I went to Europe, I went to the Netherlands via the DAFT visa, which is a 2-year visa for American entrepreneurs who want to live in the Netherlands and establish a business in the Netherlands. There are a lot of ways you can make that move, but honestly, I'm only really well informed about the DAFT way, so maybe he'll explain more about the education way here.
So I applied and I got accepted into a program in the south of the country in a tiny city called Maastricht. I didn't know much about Maastricht, but I watched a YouTube video and it seemed like a very cute and charming town to study in. So I said yes. And I ended up loving living in Maastricht, and I ended up loving what I studied. And after that, I found a job up north and moved to Amsterdam. And then COVID.
It was hard. New city, new job, new everything. And I didn't really know anyone. Luckily, I lived right next to the canals. And it was a magical time to be there.
I also ended up loving my work and finally found a profession that I really enjoy, that fulfills me. I started making friends, great friends, and then slowly but surely I started really enjoying life in the Netherlands.
I feel like for me, it was a lot easier to transition to the Netherlands because I had my girlfriend who was born and raised there. So she was able to help me make that transition and provide me with a sense of familiarity and comfort and companionship through that transition. But I can imagine, as someone who has lived on my own at one point, and even still lived within the DFW area, the area that I grew up in, I can see how that would be very, very taxing psychologically, just living in a whole new place where you don't speak the language and you're just surrounded by people you don't know. And I don't know him personally, but I feel like introverts recognize introverts. He seems like an introvert to me, just like I am. So I do think that that's something that probably factored into his decision. I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I imagine that made it much harder than my transition was.
And then 2024 happened.
It was the hardest year of my life. It started off with getting laid off. And then more life happened.
Now, I won't say too much to keep my private life private, but I will say that there was an emergency back home last year that turned my life upside down. And so I had to travel back and forth between the US and Europe. And life happens, things happen. Values change, priorities change. And for me, family is everything.
Right there. I can tell just based on his demeanor, his cadence, etc., his body language, that whatever happened deeply affected him. And truthfully, again, for somebody who really undertook this journey with that mindset of just being curious and interested, not necessarily having the urgency of just trying to escape the US, I can see how if something like that happens, you need to go be with your family. I don't know what happened, and I'm not going to pry into it, but yeah, I mean, that right there, that's really all there is to it. He really doesn't owe anybody an explanation at all, but especially with that right there, that's pretty much all he needs to say about that. When you have something like that happen, whatever it was, something that affected him to the extent that you can still see it in his body language, you have to handle that. You have to handle that. So I definitely understand.
And so I made the decision for now to come back to California.
So what are my plans? To be honest, I don't know. There's a part of me that feels behind in life, especially being in a place like San Francisco. San Francisco is home, always has been home, and I love it. And I miss the energy here, but sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially when people keep asking you, what do you do? What are your plans?
Yeah.
And then I have to remind myself, you had the hardest year of your life last year. Just chill out. Just Nixon. But one thing is for sure, I will spend time reconnecting with family, friends, the city, myself. Probably get back into work, and the work that I do is coaching, facilitation, training. But one thing that I am curious about is, who am I now? Because living in the Netherlands changed me, and I'm curious, even though I'm not living in the Netherlands anymore, can I bring the Dutch back with me? And I mean the Dutch mentality.
I don't want to cut him off right there, but he raised a really interesting point, which is that feeling of being behind your peers after having spent that time overseas. That's something I can relate to for sure. And I haven't really talked about it a whole lot on my channel, but when you see people making that linear progression, whereas you're kind of stepping off the graph altogether and exploring uncharted territory, when you come back to the graph, it feels like you're behind, but again, you were exploring uncharted territory, you expanded beyond the graph. That's an analogy I've made on my channel many times in the past, where most people are thinking about growth in that linear sense. But in reality, true growth, or rather expansion, occurs when you step away from the graph and you question the dynamics of the graph altogether, where maybe the metrics that you're assessing your life by aren't actually things that you value nearly as much. And sometimes for some people, like myself, it takes going overseas to really realize that.
For example, will I be more direct in my communication here? Will I retain the work to live mentality? Will I continue riding my bike? How will I integrate my learnings? I don't know, but I want to find out. So what's next for this channel?
Well, making videos, it's given me so much joy. It's been such a cool experience to be able to share my own experience, to connect with others, to learn from others as well. And you know what's really ironic is that here in San Francisco, I've always wanted to become a teacher, but because it's so expensive here and teachers don't make a lot, I decided to go a different path. But because of the Netherlands, I kind of changed my career to become a teacher, trainer for organizations. And in a way, I kind of became a teacher on the internet as well.
I think a lot of Europeans who have never been to California don't really understand how expensive it is out there. If you're Dutch and you think Amsterdam is expensive, you think Rotterdam is expensive, look, I understand it's probably expensive relative to where you're from, But places like San Francisco specifically, I think San Francisco might be the most egregious example in the US, but it's literally just survival mode for most people there. It's survival mode. The pay is higher, but I mean, they're taxed at rates that are similar to what you see in the Netherlands, in California, that is, especially for high income earners. The kinds of people who would be able to live comfortably in a place like San Francisco. But then generally, I haven't been to San Francisco, but if LA and what I have seen in California and the rest of the US is any indication, the infrastructure there probably isn't as good as it is in the Netherlands. So the quality of life generally is going to be lower for most people, but the cost of living is a lot higher. But really, I think the whole essence of this video, at least my primary takeaway thus far, is that we can look at these spreadsheets. We can look at, hey, the Netherlands provides a higher quality of life based on these metrics. But again, going back to that graph analogy, sometimes we have to step away from the graph and assess how much we value those metrics. So for some people, for example, going to the Netherlands is a non-starter simply because of the weather. The bike lanes, the public transit, the safety, the education system, none of that offsets the cloudy weather. Some people have sunny weather as a baseline foundational prerequisite, and they cannot be happy and satisfied in a place without that. And I think that's something that gets lost in the videos that I make, the videos that other people like me make, is that we talk about the Netherlands often in an objective manner. And we talk about Europe often in an objective manner, in that it's just objectively better. But depending on your individual circumstances, that may not always be the case.
So I would like to continue teaching, sharing, and learning, but things are going to change. It won't be life in the Netherlands, but it's going to include that Dutch perspective. And when I look at my videos, what I'm actually interested in exploring is what makes a good life. And what makes a good life, in my opinion, a lot depends on the systems and cultures that we are a part of. And for me, I'm now heavily influenced by American, Chinese, and Dutch cultures. On one hand, it's been really confusing, but on the other, it's been pretty interesting because I get to choose and pick what I like about each culture and apply it to my own life. So I want to continue exploring different cultures and systems. And first, I want to rediscover America. I know American culture is everywhere. At the same time, I also think it's one of the most misunderstood cultures out there as well. And for me, being away, it made me realize how much I miss about American culture. But at the same time, it made me realize how broken certain parts of the system are as well. And so I want to rediscover America, who I am, with this new Dutch and European lens as well. I'm sure I'll have more reflections to share sometime, but for now, I just want to say thank you to the Netherlands. I'm extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to study in a place like Maastricht, and I was able to change and find a career that I love. I'm grateful to have lived in a place like Maastricht and Amsterdam, two very international places where I met people from around the world, diverse cultures and people that changed the way that I saw the world. I'm grateful to have experienced living in a place with world-class urban design. I walked, cycled, and took public transport everywhere, and it's amazing. I'm also grateful to have slowed down. You know, I didn't realize how fast I was running until I got to the Netherlands. The Dutch way of life is indeed a slower pace of life compared to the American way. And it's not to say one is better than the other, but it is indeed slower. And I was able to slow down. And now I also realize and understand why The Dutch are some of the happiest people in the world with one of the highest qualities of life.
Right there. Right there. He hit the nail on the head. So just going back to what he was saying earlier about feeling like he's behind, a lot of that is because your priorities change when you go to Europe, because you realize that, wow, these people are actually happier. Now, that's not to say that Dutch people are just walking around smiling all the time or anything like that, but you just get a chance to see that life isn't all about making money. It's not just about surviving. Dutch people aren't always just in survival mode a lot of the time because they have the stronger social safety net in place. And in a place like San Francisco, I mean, technically, California probably has a stronger social safety net than a place like Texas, where I'm from, but it's still not going to be really anything compared to the Netherlands. So, the reason why he was the way he was in terms of sprinting, having that sprint mentality, was because in a place like San Francisco, you have to. You have to have that kind of mentality. Because either you're poor, so you're just struggling to survive, or you're wealthy and you're going to try to maintain that wealth in a world where inflation is increasing and you're already living in one of the most expensive states or expensive cities in one of the most expensive states in one of the most expensive countries in the whole entire world. So that's something that I've definitely tried to take away from being in Europe as well. It's just slowing down and really carving out time for the things I enjoy, even if they don't make me any money. Just yesterday I wrote a poem for the first time in a while, and it felt good. Not gonna make any money from it, nobody's gonna see it, but it was nice. It was nice to be able to write a poem. It's nice to be able to go to the gym and do my workouts, things of that nature, watch Netflix, hang out with my girlfriend, and really do those things without feeling guilty about doing those things. And that's something that personally I have the Netherlands to thank for.